So I'm here in conversation with Mr. Walter Alderson, who's written extensively on India and the RSS. Thank you for coming, Mr. Anderson. So I wanted to ask you about PM Modi's tenure here in India, and how do you view that as, since his tenure is now almost over?
Actually, that's a complicated question because there are layers of success.
Yes.
Has he done well for India in the aggregate? Yes. India is the fastest growing large economy in the world today, and has been a status of the last few years. It's growing at the rate of about 7.5 plus.
Yeah.
It has also received the largest amount of foreign direct investment of any country. I think last year was 61 billion, more than
Yes.
any other country, more than China. So in that sense, there are some other things like infrastructure work has been going on at a much faster pace, but that has a delayed reaction. Infrastructure investment, foreign direct investment, you don't see the results of that immediately. It takes some time for that to happen. Now, where the failure has come, and it has a political impact, is on the issue of jobs.
Yes.
It has, but
Job
maybe no
creation
one,
has been
maybe no one could do it. I mean, the number of jobs that have to be created are really quite high. I mean, you're talking about millions of jobs now. But he came into office with the hope and the expectation that that he would be able to create a lot of jobs for
Yes.
many young people who were looking for the future. The interesting thing about his tenure is when he was running for office, for national office, he seemed to argue that various kinds of programs that were geared, to help the poor was, not the way that India needed to go. India needed to develop rather than a handout. You need, a job.
Yes.
And there's much truth to that. But the question is, can you do that in India? You have a lot of poor people. No government, really can get by without significant help to various parts of the population, particularly the poor. And his government has. The health scheme is a perfect example of that. The gas cylinder scheme is another one. You can name many more.
Plus, BJP is now in 19 states across India, so
Yes.
that has also given him a bit of an
a
impetus.
boost that
Yes.
because the opposition wasn't able to put up candidates who got the imagination
Yeah.
of the people. Now there's some blowback against them in these three states where the BJP seems to be at best running neck and neck. But they've been in power for quite a few years. Rajasthan is the one exception which tends to go back and forth, and so if they lose Rajasthan, it's not unusual.
In Madhya Pradesh, of course, they're dominating.
And in Madhya Pradesh, they've dominated, and Chhattisgarh, they have dominated for quite a while. So we'll see if the anti-incumbency feeling works against them in those. I think it will work, but the question is how much it works against them in those particular states.
Yes, sir. I want to know, as far as the statesman Modi is concerned, how does the West view him?
Actually, contrary to what a lot of people thought when he was elected, don't forget he could not visit the United States, for
Yes.
example, after the rioting in Gujarat, and that was for over a dozen years. Now, when it was clear he was going to become prime minister, our ambassador here in Delhi, Nancy Powell, went to visit him with flowers in hand.
Yes, I remember
it was
that.
the sort of thing to do. And there was a sense that maybe he would not get a good reception. But in fact, he has. In his visits to the United States,
He's been able to turn around the whole
he's been
his
able
image
to,
and
he's been able
ways.
to turn around the perception of him. And Obama invited him. He invited Obama. They seemed to get along beautifully with each other. I understand that he invited Donald Trump, but for some reason that didn't work out. But my guess is that maybe next year, the year after that, I wouldn't be surprised if Donald Trump is not the person invited for the big occasion.
Especially, how do you see his relationship with Trump? Since he has seen Obama years to an extent, and then with Trump, how do you see both?
He worked at getting along, and from everything I've seen, he did. And I know some people ironically, more on the Indian side than the American side, as to how their several meetings went, and apparently they went well. He worked at it. He did his homework on what was Trump like. And you know, he is your prime minister is a very good politician, and he is also a good actor. He's done that from the time he was a child. He acted. He liked to act. You watch him on a stage.
Yes.
He has the stage presence of someone who's almost born to the stage. He's good at that. And I'm told he's also good at private conversations. I have also met him, and I must say he's the kind of person who looks at you as if you're the most important person in the world. Unlike a lot of other prominent people, they look at, and they look around. Is there anything more important, you know, other than you who's here?
He
And
seems to be like
he's
centering.
focused. He's focused, and he remembers who you are, and he remembers the circumstances that he met you. And that's very effective. For example, when he met me, among the things he said was, because you know, I had written a book about the RSS, the Brotherhood in Saffron.
Yes, I'm going to ask from you.
He read it, and he said, "But you know, it's a little out of date." You know, he didn't say write another one, but in effect, you know, it'd probably be a smart idea if you wrote.
So what was it, what was out of date about it? He said.
Oh, it was, you know, it was written in the late '80s.
Yeah.
And was published in 1988, and many of the it was a much smaller organization. It didn't have the sort of range of affiliates around it.
Congress was still the
Congress
biggest
was still the
thing.
dominant. The BJP was still a relatively small party, and so
This is
a lot
pre Ayodhya.
yeah,
So
yes, right.
in any case, it
yes.
was a
And so a lot has changed, and that was certainly the case when, you know, I got into the writing as we compared it to the other book. Some things haven't changed, but some things have, and certainly what's really changed is the affiliate, the growth and the establishment of affiliated organizations. India's largest labor union, India's largest student group, India's largest party, the governing party, and you can just go down the list of you know, the ways in which the RSS has penetrated all parts of society.
It's been quite meteoric
Yes.
as far as the BJP
Amazing,
is concerned.
yes. You know, its real growth tended to coincide with the economic reforms of the 1990s. But as the Indian economy began to grow much faster, urbanization began to take place. That seems to have worked to the benefit of the Sangh, including the party, the BJP.
Including the party, yes. So I wanted to ask you more about the book. So what do you think, you know, as far as the RSS is concerned now, how much do you think their influence is on the party and then in the country?
Well, they obviously have some, because at times of elections, their cadre, you know, worked for the party. And especially, you know, as I look at the state elections that were just held, they went all out in Rajasthan of the three big states. And I think the reason for that is they used their polling network.
The grassroots.
Yeah, the grassroots to find out
And they are good at it.
what was, you know, how was the party faring, and obviously they got word that there were problems. And so in the last couple of weeks, I've been told that they've had all sorts of local meetings to activate the cadre to go out and get people to go to the polls. In fact, the RSS has probably what is the best polling agency in India.
Exactly.
In fact, it was
They're more organized.
much more organized, and they really go to the shakas, as the local level, and they find out what do people think, you know, and you know, what are their views, who would be a good candidate, who wouldn't be a good candidate, and they pass this information on to the party if asked to do so. But where it's often assumed incorrectly is that they and the BJP kind of sit down together and work out. They don't. They're really separate organizations. And which they have differences. Right now, there is a big issue that's coming out where they have a difference, and that's the Ram Temple in Ayodhya.
There's the party, and then there's the
The RSS,
the RSS.
and some of the affiliates, like the Vishwa Hindu Parishad, would like a temple construction to start tomorrow.
Yeah.
And whereas many in the party, you know, well, we need legislation, you know, we're all for it, but you can't, you know, the but keeps coming into the conversation. That's one. The other big one, maybe even bigger than this, is a difference on development. You know, the RSS reflects an older view, a much more protective view of the Indian economy, much less enthusiastic about foreign direct investment.
Yes.
And that's also the case with, you know, its labor affiliate, the Mazdoor Sangh, and the Swadeshi Jagran Manch, which is
Jagran
actually organized to oppose FDI in the late 1990s and still does.
Yes, they used to do that.
In fact, last year when the finance minister announced that India was going to be the largest recipient of foreign direct investment at $61 billion, the government said, wonderful. But
the organization was not so happy.
Swadeshi Jagan Manch said, this is terrible. You know, this indicates that our economy is being bartered to foreign elements. The Prime Minister goes to Davos and says, we're all for openness in the economy and for globalization. And the Bharatiya Mazdoor Sangh president said, yes, you may be, but I'm not.
Yes. So how do you think that works out for India in general? Like the parent organization and both not being able to see eye to eye. Does it work out for the Indian economy, for India in general?
It doesn't seem to have harmed the Indian economy. And I think it has generated a debate which you often don't see in political parties, the kind of debate that this opposition forces on both the Sangh and the party and the various elements to engage in. They have to start thinking. They have to think through, how does this work? I think Modi continues to come down on the side of globalization, because I think he thinks it creates more jobs and therefore is necessary. And then he looks back into what India was like before it began to move into globalization in the 1990s, where you had, you know, for a young person, often a government job was the best that could
License
be
Raj, and we needed everything from the government.
Yes, and the government wasn't everything. And having myself worked in the government, I know governments can be very unimaginative, and you know, can slow things down terribly. You know, it's not the best, you know, area for innovation and development. I personally think the private enterprise is, and clearly the Prime Minister thought so too. And he comes from, you know, in a sense, a small private enterprise background.
Yes.
His father ran a tea shop.
Yeah.
And he worked for his father, so he knows that you have to have a ledger of inputs and output and all of that sort of thing that he knows very well. And also on the margins, I mean, he came to the family, wasn't poverty struck, but they were not rich. They were in fact relatively poor. So he knows, you know, the kind of frustrations that you deal with as a young person moving up in the system.
How to rise the ranks, yeah.
Yes, and how to do that.
Yes.
Yeah, and so that he has a sense for. And that has been an advantage, I think, for him.
In foreign policy, what do you, if you were to pick one of his achievements, what would it be? Just a single shot.
Ironically, I think it's getting India much more involved in the international community.
Right.
And then, you know, a specific element, and ironically now, is China. You know, China is clearly at a place where it, you know, wants to improve relations with India, and you have a prime minister who also wants to improve relations with China. This prime minister has been to China several times.
Yes.
And when he had his opening Gujarat investment, a lot of the money that came into Gujarat came from China.
Yes.
So he's accustomed to dealing with the Chinese. He's accustomed to their system. He's actually said very complimentary things about China as well. But he is a nationalist, and the Chinese recognize that.
Yes.
The RSS, you know, bring the RSS element, you know, obviously they're nationalists too, and they want him to defend, you know, India's security, and he's done that. At the Doklam issue 1 year ago, he sent Indian troops when it looked like the Chinese were.
He's been able to work both sides, from military and the balancing part,
and also the economic. In fact, during the Doklam time, and I have this in my book, I have a chapter on China. Is there were Indian ministers going to China during the whole incident, quietly going, because there were issues that had to be worked out in terms of trade.
So it was business as usual, actually.
Well, it's in the economic side. It was. Now, had things gotten worse, it may have changed, but he kept things going. And it was interesting because the RSS itself told its various affiliates, cool it. You know, let's see what happens as a consequence of that. And that was wise advice, because in fact, you know, both sides pulled out and both sides declared victory. You can't do better than that. Having been in the Foreign Service myself a long time, there's nothing better than if both sides declare a victory.
Yes.
I remember when I first came to the Foreign Service, Henry Kissinger was a prominent figure inside the State Department, the National Security Council. And he used to give a lecture, a basic lecture. And one of the points I always remember is, in any kind of confrontation, and it's between nations, in a family, in institutions, you should never have two losers. Both sides should think that they have gained something. And when you work out a deal, make sure that both sides think they gain something. And he would point to World War I, where the Allies tried to deprive Germany
Yes,
of
exactly.
things, and the Germans were bound to seek revenge, which is what they tried to do in the Second World War.
Yeah, yeah. And just the final question I wanted to ask you, domestically at least, how do you see Amit Shah and Modi's combination as far as Indian politics is concerned?
It's a remarkable pair. I have seen nothing like it in Indian politics. Of the linking of Amit Shah and Narendra Modi. I'm reminding you, I used the German example before. You had a fairly good example of that in late 19th century Germany with Bismarck. Bismarck was the person who organized the thing, and then he had an emperor who was kind of the public face of the government, but Bismarck got things working. And you have a man like Amit Shah who is all organization. And
he works the ground.
Yeah, he works the ground. And he's built what is no doubt the most efficient and effective political organization in India, in the BJP. It is, really something almost to behold how effective. And that works to its benefit. In fact, I argue that even though it looks like they're going to have losses in these three big states, it could have been even more. They do not have a very effective party organization.
In fact, in Madhya Pradesh, in the last leg, they have tried to, get hold of the numbers, because even in Madhya Pradesh, they were lagging.
Yes.
So
right.
they
had to play catch up.
Yeah. The election arithmetic is always they're trying. Amit Shah seems to be kind of the.
And you know what he's done? He's established, at the booth level, groups at the booth level to sort of give analyses and then feed that information up to the system, so that they have, a way of sort of planning how to spend money, what issues to have, and it's been really quite effective. And the question often asked is, how do the two men get along? They've known each other for a long time. They work together in Gujarat. They apparently get along beautifully with each other. Partly, I think, is because Amit Shah is not politically ambitious. And by that I mean, he doesn't want to be Prime Minister.
The next Prime Minister.
The next Prime Minister, from what I know. Or he doesn't want to have the most important, cabinet position.
Seems to be, he likes working the ground, the party, the organization.
He has much more power doing that.
Yeah.
He is kind of the gray eminence behind the curtains, who's in a sense, maneuvering things, and that's a very powerful position if you do it well, particularly if you have a national party that you're doing that with. And as I say, from everything I know, he and the Prime Minister get along well. Both of them tend to rely on themselves a lot, like most leaders. They don't tend to have lots of people that they rely on. They tend to be very self-possessed. And those two clearly are self-possessed. They're not insulted easily. They, in fact, in that way, there's something like our president, who doesn't seem to be bothered by
ruffled too easily.
Yes, by insults. A lot of people are. People who are bothered should never get in politics, because you will be insulted, and you have to be tough enough to take it. And those two are two tough guys.
Yes.
I'd like to have either one of them on my side in a battle. But there are also some downsides to that.
That's what I want to ask you also.
I think that at the end of the day, for politics, though, it's probably more effective to have the kinds of people that they are.
Because for the BJP, you think the question is what next? Yes. I mean, after the two-doer is like.
Well, that's true. You heard that in India with Nehru, because Nehru really didn't train someone to be coming after him. And there's no obvious successor.
Yeah.
There will be something happen. There will be a successor, but there isn't one waiting in the wings.
Yeah.
To come out.
So that's kind of a question mark for the BJP.
Yes, it is. Right. And same is true with Amit Shah. There's no immediate, he has deputies, but none I know of, is really waiting to step in should something happen to him. So both, the party needs both of them.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Sure, my pleasure.
Thank you so much for this.